Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are going to get our hands dirty. We're going from zero to a live, running serverless application. And we're going to do it together, step by step, building your very first AWS Lambda function.
Okay, here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with why serverless is such a big deal. Then we'll get our gear ready, actually build the function, make sure it works, and wrap up with how to clean up and where you can go from here. Let's jump in.
So first up, let's tackle the big why. What's the whole promise behind serverless? Why are so many developers so excited about this stuff?
Well, it really boils down to this one simple but powerful question. Imagine if you could run your code without ever having to think about a server again. Seriously, no more patching, no more worrying about scaling, no managing operating systems. You just get to focus on what you do best, writing code. And that's exactly what AWS Lambda is. It's what we call a serverless compute service. You basically upload your code, and AWS handles, well, everything else. It's totally event-driven. So, an API call comes in, or maybe a new file gets uploaded. Boom! That event triggers your function, it wakes up, does its job, and goes right back to sleep. All of it is managed for you, automatically. And this is the real kicker, the cost. You only pay for the compute time you actually use. There's absolutely no charge when your code isn't running. Think about that. No more paying for a server to just sit there, idle, waiting for traffic. You pay only for the milliseconds your code is executing. It's a total game changer. All right, enough talk. Let's get ready to build something. Before we jump into the AWS console, let's just do a quick check to make sure we've got all our gear ready. And don't worry, the list is super short. All you're going to need is an active AWS account. You can get one for free. And you'll need the AWS command line interface, the CLI, installed and configured on your computer. That's it. Simple. Okay, now for the fun part. This is where the magic happens. We're going to build our first function from scratch. And it's just 3 simple steps. So here's the plan. First, we need to create something called an IAM role. Just think of this as giving our function the permissions it needs to do its job. Next, we'll actually create the function in the AWS console, give it a name, and tell it we're using Python. And finally, the best part, we'll add our code. Okay, so I'm here in the AWS IAM console. We're going to create a new role. The use case here is, of course, Lambda. Now, this next part is super important for security. We're going to attach a policy called AWS Lambda Basic Execution Role. All this does is give our function permission to write logs to CloudWatch. That's it. It's called the principle of least privilege, and it's a really good habit to get into. It's absolutely essential for debugging later on. Okay, let's give it a name and create the role. Done.
All right, check out the code we're going to use. It's incredibly simple, right? This little block of Python is a complete Lambda function. The key part is that Lambda handler function. That's the entry point that AWS is going to call. It gets 2 things passed into it, an event object, which has all the data about what triggered the function, and a context object with runtime info. So what does our code do? Well, it just prints a message to the logs, which is why we needed that IAM role, and then it returns a simple response with a status code of 200 and that hello from Lambda message. That's literally all there is to it. Okay, so now I'm back in the AWS Lambda console. Let's create a new function from scratch. We'll call it my first Lambda function. For the runtime, we'll pick Python, and for the execution role, we're going to use the existing role we just created. Perfect. Let's create the function. All right, now that it's created, we'll just scroll down to the code editor, paste in our Python code right here, and hit that deploy button. And just like that, our code is live in the cloud.
Okay, so we've built it, we've deployed it, but does it actually work? Let's find out. Time to test this thing.
So we've got a couple of ways to check if it's working. The first is right here in the AWS console. There's a test tab that's perfect for a quick sanity check. The second way, which is a bit more like a real-world scenario, is to trigger it from our own computer using the AWS CLI. First, let's use the console. I'm going to go to the test tab. We need to configure a test event, but for our simple function, we don't need any special input, so we can just give it a name, like my test event, and leave the default empty JSON. Now let's click test, and look at that, a green success banner. And right here in the response, we can see our hello from Lambda. Perfect. That's how we know the core logic is working.
Okay, console test passed. Now for the real deal. Let's trigger this from our own command line. All you need to do is run this command in your terminal. This tells AWS to invoke our function by its name, and then, this is cool, it saves the response into a new file called output.json right on your machine. And if we go ahead and open up that output.json file, There it is, the exact same response we saw in the console. This is awesome because it proves we can trigger our function from anywhere, it runs in the cloud, and sends the result right back to us. It works.
So there you have it. We did it. We built, deployed, and tested a serverless function. But wait, before we celebrate, a really good developer always cleans up their mess. It's a crucial step to make sure you don't get any surprise bills later.
And cleaning up is super easy. There are just two things we need to get rid of. First, the Lambda function we created, and second, that IAM role that we made to give it permissions. So back in the Lambda console, I'll just select the function, go to Actions, and hit Delete. Confirm that. Next, I'll pop over to the IAM console, find the role we created, and delete that too. And we're done. Our account is back to exactly how it was when we started. This is such a good habit to get into whenever you're trying things out in the cloud. So now that you've got the hang of it, what's next? Well, that simple hello Lambda function is really just the beginning. The possibilities are huge. You can use this exact same pattern to build the backend for your next mobile app, to automatically process images when they're uploaded, to crunch data in real time. You could even build chatbots. The core idea is exactly the same. Seriously, think about what we just did in a few minutes. You now have the power to run code in the cloud on demand without touching a single server. That's a superpower. So the only question left is, what are you going to build with it?